The courthouse was silent, but the silence did not mean peace. It was the kind of silence heavy with judgment, where every breath, every glance, every smirk carried weight. At the center of it all stood Victor Hale, a polished lawyer with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. He waved his hand as if swatting away a fly, nearly spilling the water glass of the woman seated before him. His voice carried arrogance as he circled her like a predator. "Let me explain this to you," he said, his words slow and biting. "The precedent in this case means your little community hall doesn't qualify for protection. Do you understand that much?" His tone was the kind that was not meant to inform but to humiliate. He wanted the jury to see an old woman stumbling in confusion. He wanted the court to believe she was fragile, outdated, unfit to stand against his modern authority. But the woman before him did not break. Her name was Mary Collins, 73 years old, leaning on a wooden cane that had walked with her through decades of battles, some won and some lost. She sat quietly, her fingers curled around the cane, her eyes calm, her dignity intact. Across the courtroom, her granddaughter Anna shifted in her seat. Only 28, it was her very first major case as a lawyer. She half rose in anger, her face flushed at the way her grandmother was being spoken to. A bailiff stepped forward, sensing the tension, ready to keep order. Victor smirked. He loved this moment. The power. The spectacle. He straightened his expensive tie with a flourish, confident that this would be another easy victory. But what he didn't know was that Mary Collins carried a secret, one that would change the course of this trial, and shatter the pride he clung to so tightly. Hours earlier, the story had begun outside the courthouse. The marble pillars glistened in the morning light, casting long shadows on the steps. A modest sedan pulled to the curb. Mary stepped out slowly, her cane tapping the pavement, and Anna hurried to her side with a weathered leather briefcase in hand. "Are you sure about this, Grandma?" Anna asked, trying to sound steady, but her voice trembled with nerves. Mary adjusted the collar of her simple navy dress. It wasn't glamorous, but it carried the quiet strength of someone who had always stood tall in the face of doubt. She looked at her granddaughter with a faint smile. "We've prepared well," she replied softly, patting Anna's hand. "Remember what I always tell you?" Anna finished the line with a smile of her own. "The law doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest." Together they began climbing the courthouse steps. Around them, lawyers in polished suits strode past without even a glance. To them, Mary was just an old woman in plain clothes. To them, Anna was just a nervous young attorney out of her depth. None of them suspected the fire that would soon be lit inside those walls. At that same moment, a sleek black town car pulled up. Victor Hale emerged like a man stepping onto a stage. His suit was flawless, his sunglasses catching the light. His assistant scrambled behind him, juggling multiple briefcases stamped with the proud logo of his powerful firm. Victor moved with the confidence of someone who had won too many times to believe losing was possible. Inside the pre-trial conference room, Mary and Anna carefully arranged their papers. Their notes were handwritten, their folders modest, but every detail had been checked twice. Victor paused mid-sentence as he noticed them. His eyebrows rose slightly, and with a dismissive smile he introduced himself. "Victor Hale, representing Eastbrook Development," he announced loudly to the room, though his words were meant more for display than courtesy. He extended a hand only to Anna, barely glancing at Mary. "Anna Collins, representing the Westfield Community Hall," Anna said firmly, meeting his grip with a strength that surprised him. "And this is my co-counsel, Mary Collins." Victor gave Mary a glance so brief it bordered on insult. "Community Hall case, isn't it? The old building on Pine Street?" He chuckled. "Should be quick and easy." Mary took a step forward, her voice calm. "Mr. Hale, I'd like to discuss the zoning regulations. That might—" Victor cut her off instantly. "Let's save that for the courtroom." His tone dripped with condescension as he turned back to Anna. "First major case, isn't it? Bold choice to start with something this ambitious." The clerk entered with files, and Mary received a sympathetic look. Everyone could see the way Victor dismissed her. Everyone could hear the arrogance in his tone. But Mary did not respond with anger. She simply opened her small worn notebook, filled with decades of notes in her own neat handwriting. She turned to a marked page, nodded once, and closed it again. What Victor Hale did not yet realize was that every page of that notebook carried history. And history was about to speak louder than his arrogance ever could. Judge Harriet Moore entered the courtroom. Stern fare, respected by all. The atmosphere shifted at once as the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. Victor smoothed his jacket and strode to the center with the ease of a performer stepping into his spotlight. His voice boomed with confidence as he spoke of progress, economics, and the bright future that Eastbrook Development promised. He gestured toward Mary and Anna. The plaintiffs want you to believe their outdated hall deserves protection, but the facts and the law are clear. This insignificant building stands in the way of a project that will bring prosperity to the entire city. The jury nodded, scribbling notes. Victor's presence was magnetic, his words carefully chosen. For a moment it looked as though the battle had already been lost. Then Anna rose for her opening. Her hands shook slightly as she held her papers, but her voice grew stronger with each word. She spoke of history, of a hall that had been more than brick and wood, a place where black entrepreneurs built their first businesses, a place that had served as shelter during times of struggle, a place that carried the soul of a community. Victor stood sharply. Objection, Your Honor. Unsupported allegations. Judge Moore raised her hand. Sit down, Mr. Hale. Let her continue. Anna pressed on, though her heart raced. She stumbled briefly on a technical phrase about zoning designations, and Victor smirked. Loud enough for the jury, he muttered. Perhaps counsel needs a refresher on basic zoning law. Mary calmly slid a note across the table. Anna read it, her confidence returning. She turned to the witness with renewed strength. Is it true your company bypassed the historic review process by filing under Section 48B instead of the standard procedure? The witness froze, caught off guard. Victor's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked toward Mary, who sat silently with her hands folded. The first crack had appeared in his perfect armor, and Mary hadn't even spoken yet. The courtroom air grew heavier as the first witness stumbled. The jurors shifted, sensing that Victor Hale's unshakable confidence was no longer quite so solid. Victor adjusted his tie and leaned back, forcing a smirk to hide his unease. He whispered to his colleague, "She got lucky. It won't last." But Mary Collins wasn't relying on luck. Every question, every note, every calm glance she gave her granddaughter was part of a strategy she had carried in her heart for years. When the recess ended, Victor rose with exaggerated smoothness, striding to the center of the courtroom. His voice carried like thunder. "Your Honor," he said, "the precedent in Baker versus West Haven is crystal clear. Community impact evidence, no matter how emotional, cannot outweigh documented economic benefit. This entire line of questioning is irrelevant." He turned toward Mary with a patronizing smile. "Perhaps we should explain what precedent means in a legal context. Would that help, Ms. Collins?" The jurors stirred, some glancing uncomfortably at one another. They could see the condescension dripping from his words. Yet Victor believed he had just crushed her credibility. Mary lifted her hand slightly, a quiet signal that she wished to respond. Judge Moore, curious, nodded. Mary rose slowly, her cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime with the truth on her side. "In Baker versus West Haven," she said, "wasn't the community evidence ruled inadmissible because it was gathered after the zoning application was filed?" Victor blinked, his smooth reply hesitating for the first time. "Well, yes, but—" "And did the ruling not state," Mary continued, her voice cutting clean through his words, "that properly conducted assessments completed before the application would be admissible?" Victor's jaw tightened. "That's a simplified reading of the case." Mary tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to review page 52, paragraph 3? I'm sure it will refresh your memory." The courtroom shifted again. Victor tried to laugh it off. "I'm quite familiar with the case, Ms. Collins." Mary's calm gaze didn't waver. "Then perhaps you can cite which subsequent ruling altered that standard." Victor rattled off a case name with certainty. Mary waited a beat, then pointed out a detail he had twisted. His face stiffened. He tried again, citing another ruling. Once again, she calmly exposed the flaw in his interpretation. With every exchange, his confidence bled away. The jurors leaned forward, riveted by the shift in power. The very woman he had mocked as fragile was dismantling his arguments with precision. Frustrated, Victor leaned toward her and spoke louder, his voice echoing in the room. "Memory can be unreliable at a certain age, Ms. Collins." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Moore's gavel struck sharply. "Mr. Hale, refrain from personal remarks." Victor forced a stiff apology. Of course, Your Honor, but the damage was done. His mask of charm was cracking, and everyone in that room had seen it. Mary gave no sign of victory. She simply returned to her seat, jotting a note in her old notebook, her composure unshaken. Anna leaned close. "Grandma," she whispered, "how are you so calm after what he said?" Mary's pen paused. "Because calm is a weapon he will never understand. Outrage burns quickly. Preparation endures." She tapped the notebook once, then folded her hands. "And we are very prepared." The afternoon session began with Eastbrook Development's star witness, their chief planning officer. He spoke confidently about jobs, tax revenue, and growth. Victor guided him with polished questions, each designed to paint the project as unstoppable progress. When it came time for cross-examination, Anna stood, determined. She pressed the witness on alternative sites, on zoning codes, on overlooked community rights. Victor pounced at her hesitation. "Objection. Counsel is confused about the most basic zoning principles." Judge Moore's sharp look silenced him, but Anna's confidence faltered. She stumbled over her next question. Mary slid another note across the table. Anna read it, inhaled deeply, and turned back to the witness. "Sir, isn't it true that your company filed under Section 48B, precisely to avoid the historic designation review required under standard procedure?" The witness hesitated. "I would need to consult legal on that filing." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Victor's smirk evaporated completely. His eyes darted toward Mary, who sat perfectly still, her hands folded like a woman waiting patiently for the truth to speak for itself. But the battle was only beginning. Victor still believed he could twist the law, still believed that the courtroom was his stage. What he didn't know was that Mary Collins was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when her secret would turn his arrogance into ashes. The second day of testimony began under tense skies. Rain streaked the courthouse windows, each drop beating like a drum on the glass. The atmosphere inside mirrored the storm outside. Victor Hale strutted into the courtroom with the same slick confidence, but his eyes betrayed something new, unease. He had been rattled the day before. Yet in his mind, today was his chance to regain control. Mary Collins, however, seemed unshaken. She sat quietly, her cane resting by her chair, her small notebook open before her. Her steady presence was a sharp contrast to Victor's restless energy. Eastbrook Development's next witness was their star economist, Dr. Charles Perkins. Victor introduced him with great flair. Dr. Perkins holds a PhD in economics, 2 decades of experience, countless studies on urban development, a leading expert in his field. The jury nodded, impressed. Perkins began with confidence. "Our analysis projects 300 new jobs, over $15 million in annual revenue, and a substantial increase in tax benefits. The current property generates little to nothing in comparison." Victor's chest swelled as if he had already won. "Thank you, Doctor. Clear numbers. Hard facts. That's what this case is about." When Anna rose for cross-examination, she struggled. Perkins swatted her questions away with academic jargon. Victor objected repeatedly, smirking each time. Anna faltered, her hands tightening on her notes. Mary leaned close. "Let me take it from here." Anna hesitated, then nodded. Mary stood, her cane tapping with each measured step as she approached. She faced Perkins directly, her voice calm. "Dr. Perkins, good afternoon. In your economic projections, what multiplier did you use for indirect job creation?" Perkins blinked, surprised by the precision. "We applied a standard 1.8 multiplier. And that multiplier," Mary continued, "is based on the Henderson-McHale model from 2018, correct?" Perkins nodded. "Yes, that's right." Mary tilted her head. "Interesting choice. Were you aware that the Henderson-McHale model was designed for suburban developments, not urban renewal projects?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Perkins's confidence faltered. "I suppose that is true." Victor shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. She is confusing the witness with technical misinterpretations." Judge Moore's gavel struck. "Overruled." "The witness will answer," Mary pressed on. "Doctor, in your tax revenue formula, you used the commercial property variable for the third term. Did you consider that a mixed-use development requires the residential adjustment factor instead?" Perkins' eyes widened. He leaned over his notes, color draining from his face. "That's a minor oversight." Mary's voice sharpened slightly. A minor oversight that inflates your projections by nearly 25%, does it not? The jury gasped. Even Judge Moore leaned forward. Perkins stammered. I would need to recheck the calculations. Victor sprang up again, voice raised. Your Honor, I request to redirect immediately. But no one was looking at Victor now. Every eye was fixed on Mary Collins, the elderly woman who had just dismantled the testimony of a professional economist with a few quiet questions. Victor forced a laugh as he guided Perkins off the stand. His bravado had cracks now. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through his notes. He leaned toward his associate. She's bluffing. She must be bluffing. But deep down, for the first time, Victor Hale began to wonder if he had underestimated his opponent. The afternoon session brought another witness, Dr. James Howard, a historian called by Anna and Mary. He spoke with passion about the community hall's legacy. This building has been more than walls and wood. It has been a sanctuary, a hub for black-owned businesses since the 1950s. It housed the city's first black-owned bank. Civil rights lawyers once prepared their cases within its walls. It still supports small businesses to this day. The jurors listened closely, some visibly moved. Victor rose for cross-examination, his voice sharp and mocking. Dr. Howard, is this building on the National Register of Historic Places? No, Howard admitted. Does it hold recognized architectural significance? No, but then, Victor cut him off, his tone triumphant. Without architectural distinction, your claims of cultural importance are irrelevant. As established in Williams versus Metro Development, mere history does not grant protection. He turned toward the jury with a smirk, certain he had regained his advantage. But Mary rose again. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is mischaracterizing the Williams case. Victor spun toward her with a smug smile. I am quite familiar with Williams versus Metro Development. The ruling clearly stated. Mary's calm voice cut across his words. The ruling clearly distinguished between General Historical Association, which is insufficient, and documented cultural significance with ongoing community function, which is precisely what our witness testified to. The courtroom stirred. Judge Moore nodded slowly. Objection overruled. Ms. Collins may continue. Victor's smirk flickered, then vanished, and still, Mary had not revealed her true identity. The jury could sense that this woman was more than she appeared, but how much more, no one yet knew. Victor Hale, sweating behind his confident mask, was about to find out. The third morning of the trial dawned brighter, but the courtroom was darker than ever with tension. News had already begun to spread through the courthouse. Lawyers whispered in the hallways, clerks traded quiet comments. Everyone could sense that something extraordinary was unfolding inside Judge Moore's courtroom. Victor Hale arrived with reinforcements. His senior partner, Harold Blackwell, a man feared across the state, now sat sternly in the gallery. Victor straightened his posture, desperate to prove himself under his mentor's watchful eye. Mary Collins noticed, but she did not react. She sipped water slowly, turned a page in her notebook, and waited. The defense called Robert Jensen, a city planning official. He spoke firmly about how the community hall failed to meet modern building codes. Electrical systems, accessibility, safety, all outdated. Renovation costs would reach at least $2.5 million, Jensen declared. A burden the taxpayer should not have to carry. Victor's voice carried triumph. And therefore, this building cannot stand in the way of a project that promises jobs and growth. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Anna rose for cross-examination, her voice steady but strained. She asked whether gradual compliance plans could have been considered, whether modernization was possible in stages. Victor objected again and again, mocking her in the process. Your Honor, counsel is wasting time. Perhaps the young attorney needs a refresher in municipal procedure. Judge Moore's glare silenced him, but Anna's confidence faltered under the repeated interruptions. She looked at her grandmother helplessly. Mary leaned close and whispered, May I? Anna nodded. Mary rose once more, cane tapping in rhythm as she approached. The sound echoed like a heartbeat in the tense room. Mr. Jensen, she said gently, when did you personally inspect the community hall? Jensen shifted uncomfortably. I reviewed the assessments from our department. So, Mary continued calmly, you yourself have not visited the property? Well, no, but that is standard procedure, Mary's voice sharpened. So your testimony is based entirely on second-hand reports, some of which are outdated by nearly a decade. The jury leaned in. Jensen stammered, That is correct. Victor shot up again. Your Honor, whether he visited the site or not doesn't change the fact that the hall is unsafe and outdated. He read from his notes with deliberate precision. As established in Baker v. West Haven, when public safety is demonstrably at risk, historical designation must give way to compliance requirements. The precedent is unambiguous. He smirked at Mary as though daring her to challenge him again. Mary waited until he finished, then lifted her chin slightly. Mr. Hale's quotation from Baker v. West Haven is accurate. But what he failed to mention is the very next paragraph, which creates an exception for properties with documented cultural significance if renovation plans are already in motion. The jurors turned, their pens scratching furiously. Victor's smile flickered, then returned. The exception does not apply here. As established in the Turner Amendment to Baker v. West Haven, funding for such renovation must be secured before the development application is filed. He spread his hands grandly. The community hall has not secured such funding. Therefore, the exception fails. Mary's eyes narrowed slightly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire courtroom. There is no Turner Amendment to Baker v. West Haven, Mr. Hale. The room froze. The silence was so deep it was almost physical. Victor's smirk held for one long second before faltering. He laughed dismissively, waving his hand. Of course there is. Perhaps in your day the record looked different, but modern property law is clear. Mary's voice grew stronger, each word deliberate. I know with absolute certainty that no such amendment exists, Victor scoffed. And how could you possibly know that, Ms. Collins? Mary leaned on her cane, her eyes steady. Because I was the lead counsel on Baker v. West Haven, and I personally wrote the majority opinion. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. The jury's pens fell silent. Even Judge Moore leaned forward, her eyes wide. Victor stood frozen, his mouth open mid-reply, but no words came. Mary reached into her portfolio and withdrew a folder. Her hands did not tremble. She handed it to the clerk, who delivered it to Judge Moore. Inside were credentials, photographs and articles chronicling Mary's long legal career, culminating in her years as a justice on the state Supreme Court. I also chaired the legislative committee that drafted the historic Preservation Act, she added softly, the very law Mr. Hale has misquoted throughout this trial. The courtroom erupted again, voices rising, whispers flying. Judge Moore's gavel struck sharply. Order in this courtroom. Silence fell once more. Victor's face drained of color. I wasn't aware of your background, Justice Collins. Mary met his gaze, her voice calm but firm. You weren't aware because you chose not to know. You saw an elderly woman and dismissed me. You assumed weakness where there was only patience. Victor opened his mouth, but no reply came. His arrogance had collapsed into silence, and the courtroom, once his stage, now belonged entirely to Mary Collins. The silence after Mary's revelation stretched so long that it felt like the walls themselves were listening. For a moment no one breathed, then the whispers started. A wave of astonishment swept through the gallery. Clerks leaned toward each other. Jurors stared wide-eyed at Mary Collins, the woman they had thought was just another elderly citizen clinging to nostalgia. Victor Hale stood frozen, every trace of confidence drained from his face. His senior partner, Harold Blackwell, shifted in his seat with visible fury. He knew what this meant. He knew how badly Victor had miscalculated. Judge Moore cleared her throat, steadying the courtroom. Justice Collins, may I ask why you withheld your credentials until now? Mary straightened her shoulders. Because I wanted this case judged on merit, not reputation. But when opposing counsel misrepresented the very precedents I authored, I could no longer remain silent. Her words landed with the weight of a gavel. Victor stumbled forward, trying to salvage himself. Justice Collins, I sincerely apologize. I would never have spoken in such a way had I known. Mary's calm interruption cut him in half. That is precisely the problem, Mr. Hale. Respect in a courtroom should not depend on credentials. Every person deserves dignity, whether they are a retired justice or a community volunteer. Victor's face burned red. His senior partner looked away, ashamed to be seated beside him. As the court resumed, Anna rose with renewed fire. She presented a sealed envelope Mary had quietly received earlier from an old colleague. Inside were original notes and transcripts from Baker versus Westhaven, bearing Mary's own handwriting. The evidence showed, beyond all doubt, that Victor had invented parts of his argument. His Turner Amendment did not exist. His claim of modern interpretation was smoke. Victor attempted to object, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, this is improper." Judge Moore's gavel struck sharply. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. This court will not entertain fabricated precedent." Victor slumped back in his seat. For the first time in his career, his power had abandoned him. But Mary wasn't done. She slid another folder to Anna. Her granddaughter opened it and froze, her eyes widening. "Grandma, this is evidence of systematic acquisitions." Mary nodded. "Present it." Anna stepped to the center, her voice clear. "Over the past 5 years, Eastbrook Development has purchased historically black-owned properties at far below market value, while paying premium prices for similar properties in wealthier white neighborhoods. These purchases were hidden under 7 different shell companies, all traced back to Eastbrook. Gasps filled the room again. Jurors leaned forward, staring at the charts Anna displayed. The pattern was undeniable. Victor jumped to his feet, desperation spilling from him. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the zoning dispute," Judge Moore's voice thundered. "Overruled. This evidence speaks directly to the character and conduct of your client." Victor's mouth opened, then closed. He sat down heavily, eyes fixed on the table. His mentor leaned in, whispering something sharp in his ear. Victor flinched as though struck. When the recess came, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Lawyers whispered in corridors. Clerks rushed to phones. News of Mary Collins's true identity and Victor's humiliation was already spreading through the building. Victor stood stiffly in the hallway, sweat forming on his brow. His senior partner gripped his arm with cold fury. "You mocked a former Supreme Court justice," Harold hissed. "The very justice who wrote the law you built your case on. You've not only embarrassed yourself, you've humiliated this entire firm." Victor stammered. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to look," Harold snapped. "Her portrait hangs in our conference room." Victor's knees weakened. The man who had strutted into the trial like a conquering king now looked like a schoolboy caught cheating. Back in the courtroom, Anna held the damning evidence high, the charts glowing under the lights. The jury studied every line, every number. For the first time, Eastbrook Development looked less like a company chasing progress and more like a predator feasting on the vulnerable. Mary remained silent through it all, her hands folded on her notebook. She did not gloat. She did not smirk. She sat with the dignity of a woman who had seen decades of battles and knew the power of patience. Victor Hale, once untouchable, was now cornered, and the walls he had built with arrogance were collapsing. The storm inside the courtroom had reached its peak. By now, every person in attendance knew that Victor Hale's empire of arrogance had crumbled. The jurors sat forward, their faces hard with focus. The gallery buzzed with energy. And at the center of it all, Mary Collins sat calm, her silver hair catching the light like a crown. Judge Moore returned from recess, her gavel striking the bench. "Court is back in session." Blackwell, Victor's senior partner, rose and requested a sidebar. His voice was tight, controlled, but desperate. "Your Honor, Eastbrook Development is prepared to withdraw its claim on the community hall. We will explore settlement immediately." Mary's voice carried across the room, steady and unflinching. "That is not enough. This case has revealed a pattern of discrimination that extends far beyond one building." The courtroom stirred. Blackwell swallowed hard, knowing he had little ground left. "We request 48 hours to negotiate a comprehensive settlement." Judge Moore nodded. "Granted." 2 days later, the courthouse brimmed with tension as the parties reconvened. This time, Victor Hale did not lead. He sat pale and silent beside his senior partner, a shadow of the man who once strutted like he owned the courtroom. Blackwell read the terms. Eastbrook would abandon its claim on the community hall, donate $500,000 toward renovations, submit to an independent audit of its acquisitions, and establish a community advisory board with authority over future projects. They would also fund apprenticeship programs for minority contractors to ensure opportunity was shared, not stolen. Mary reviewed the terms carefully, then looked up. "There is one more condition." The room hushed. "Mr. Hale must face the State Bar Association for his conduct." No lawyer should escape accountability after fabricating precedent, mocking a witness, and showing bias in this court. Victor's shoulders sagged. He closed his eyes, the reality hitting like a final blow. Weeks later, Victor Hale sat before the State Bar's disciplinary committee. The grandeur of his suit no longer masked the unease in his eyes. Mary Collins sat in the witness section, dignified as always, with Anna beside her. The charges were read aloud. Misconduct, deliberate misrepresentation, disrespect toward opposing counsel. Victor attempted a polished defense, but halfway through he faltered. His voice softened. The truth is, I saw an elderly black woman and assumed she was unworthy of my respect. I didn't bother to research her. I treated her with contempt, and in doing so I failed not just as an attorney but as a human being. The committee deliberated, then returned its decision. Victor Hale was suspended for 6 months. He would complete hundreds of hours of ethics training, community service, and, by order of the committee, his service would take place at the very community hall he had tried to destroy. The months that followed transformed everything. The hall was restored, its stained glass windows glowing again, its wooden floors polished, its rooms alive with music, workshops, and voices. Anna's practice grew rapidly, known now for defending communities against predatory developers. Mary became an advisor to state reforms on legal ethics. Her story taught in law schools as a lesson against arrogance and bias. And Victor Hale, on his first day of community service, he walked up the steps of the hall, unsure of the welcome he'd receive. Children ran past him laughing. Volunteers painted walls, carried boxes, and handed out flyers. And in the middle of it all stood Mary Collins, leaning on her cane, watching him with the same calm dignity she had carried in court. He approached her quietly. "Justice Collins, I'm sorry. Not because of who you are, but because of who I wasn't. I hope I can learn." Mary studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Apologies matter less than changed behavior. You'll find plenty of chances to change in this place." Months later, at the hall's grand reopening, the city gathered to celebrate. Music played, speeches were given, and laughter filled the air. Anna welcomed guests to the new legal clinic, her eyes shining with pride. Mary stood on the steps, her cane tapping lightly against the stone, her silver hair bright in the sun. The woman once mocked as frail now stood as the heart of her community, her presence commanding respect without ever demanding it. Victor was there too, not as a conqueror, but as a student. He helped carry boxes, guided children in computer classes, and listened more than he spoke. The arrogance that had once filled him had been stripped away, replaced by something quieter, something humbler. And as the sun set on that day, Anna leaned toward her grandmother and whispered, "Do you ever wish you had revealed who you were sooner?" "It might have spared us all of this." Mary smiled softly. "If I had revealed it at the start, Victor would have treated me differently, but he would not have changed. Now he must confront not just how he treated me, but how he treats everyone. True justice is not only about winning cases. It is about transforming hearts one by one." She looked out over the hall, its windows glowing once again, and let out a breath of peace. The fight had been worth every moment.